Israel and Iran are the deadliest of enemies. Both are separated by over 1,000 kilometers geographically. They've been fighting an undeclared proxy war since the 1980s. But on the 1st of April, a red line was crossed when Israel struck at an Iranian consulate in Damascus, killing 7 Iranian military personnel. Iran retaliated by striking at Israel nearly 2 weeks later with 300 drones and missiles. Now, this is the first time that both countries have directly struck at each other. This marks an escalation. Will Israel retaliate for the Iranian cruise missile attack? Joining me to discuss this are defense analyst Abhijit Iyer Mitra, Lev Aran, who's joining us from Israel, and my colleague Aditya Raj Kaul in the studio at News9+. Gentlemen, welcome to the News9+ show. Abhijit, I want to start by asking you, since you've just returned from Israel, the world's fiercest missile and drone attack where fortunately no one was killed and a vast majority of missiles were intercepted. I mean, it's almost science fiction, the kind of visuals that we saw. Have Israel and Iran now made their respective points, and will they go back to fighting this proxy war that they've been fighting for nearly 4 decades?
I think not. I think this is just the beginning of something a lot worse.
Right.
Because the question we need to ask is, what were those two IRGC generals doing in the embassy in Damascus?
Right.
They were pretty much directing attacks on Israel, both mostly by Hezbollah,
Yes.
but we presume something by Hamas as well, or at least so the Israelis tell us. Now, the issue here is, Israel never admitted responsibility for bombing that building in
Yes.
Damascus. We need to remember this.
Right.
This was like a strike on the Iranian reactor. As long as you don't accept responsibility and
Yes.
allow it to be leave it up in the air,
Right.
remains a proxy war. The problem is Iran has now attacked directly. It had the option to do all of this using the Houthis and
Right.
but it did not. So it has kind of broken the rules of the game in one sense of the
Right.
game, if you want to call it that. Number one. Number two, the attack wouldn't have cost Iran more than about $120 million, because see, they're very good with price point innovation. Right. We've seen how cheap those Iranian drones are, which the Russians are now mass producing.
Yes.
Their cruise missiles have been brought down to a very significant price point, as have their ballistic missiles. You know, ballistic
Yes.
missile technology is not new. It's 70-year-old technology.
Right.
So it doesn't exactly, it's not rocket science, quote unquote. In that sense, right?
Right.
So it cost about $100 to $120 million max,
Right.
maybe even $200 million outer limit. The defense that Israel had to mount cost about $1.3 billion.
Yes.
So even if you look at the success rate of almost 98%,
Right.
because all the cruise missiles were shot down, all the drones were shot down.
Yes.
Only 7 of the 110 ballistic missiles were not, because ballistic missiles
Right.
are horribly difficult to intercept.
Yes.
They fly at something like Mach 15, Mach 16, 15 to 16 times the speed of sound, impossible to intercept almost. In spite of that, they did. Now, 1.3 billion versus 120 million is a 10:1 ratio, and that is
Yes.
completely unsustainable. This is the problem of static defense.
Right.
Gaza wall is a classic case of static defense. Maginot Line, Bar-Lev Line, Great Wall of China, static defense. It never works. The Mongols conquered the Great Wall. The Germans went over the Maginot Line. The Egyptians went over the Bar-Lev Line.
Right.
And Hamas went over Gaza. So that wasn't going to work. This is a kind of aerial static wall that isn't going to work.
Right.
They need an active forward defense, which is to say going after targets in Iran,
Yes.
to increase the cost for Iran. Right now, it's been a very low-cost venture for Iran.
Right.
Which, if it is allowed to persist, will, over the long run, it turns against Israel.
Right, absolutely. Very important points there, Abhijit. The fact that the static defensive line doesn't work in the kind of asymmetries that you mentioned of the 100 million versus a billion to defend from. But Lev, you're right there in the line of fire in Israel, just a few kilometers away from the border with Hezbollah. It's amazing how you're able to keep that smile on. But having been to Israel so many times, I know Israelis have this unimaginable ability to live in the face of fire and, the kind of missile strikes that have been thrown your way for the last couple of decades. But, tell us whether a red line has now been crossed by Iran, as Abhijit mentioned, that for the first time, Iran has launched a direct attack and claimed responsibility for that. What is the onus of response going to be for Israel? I mean, does Israel have to strike back now because that red line has been crossed? And as Abhijit mentioned, that you have to respond to, heighten the costs of escalating, the cost that Iran has basically raised, the threshold that has been crossed. You have to make Iran aware of the consequences of that. Lev, just tell us what Israel is thinking right now.
If there is now a Hezbollah missile directed at me, at least I will try to be honest in my last interview. I think that if we are frank, the benevolent paternalism of Americans paid the more than $1 billion of defense, not the Israeli budget.
Right.
And even if we look at the Israeli technology, mostly they are financed by the American taxpayer, not by the Israeli taxpayer.
Right.
So in a way, you need to pay a price in a situation that a big chunk of your defense budget is paid by someone else. Right. So it means that even if we have the moral right to attack Iran back, I think our obligation to the big interests of the Americans in this West Asian jungle are now larger than ever. So it is not a moral question. It is also a question if Americans want right now a war between Iran and Israel. And I think that Iranians were banking on a situation that at least until November, Biden will not allow the oil prices go to like 130, 140, 150. And if their success will not be too much, like if we don't see like 10,000 dead Israelis, most probably Biden will not allow Israel to start an attack without his permission.
Right. Very important point there, Aditya, the fact that the United States has said that they are not going to be backing an Israeli counterstrike on Iran. And there was a cabinet meeting just a few hours ago, and Benny Gantz apparently said that the event is not over. Can Israel attack Iran without the United States' support?
As of now, it's clear that the war cabinet, led by the Prime Minister Netanyahu, has very much taken a U-turn. It seems because immediately after the attack, when it was seen that the 300 missiles have been thwarted, the Iranian missiles, the scale of the attack may be huge, but the damage is minimum. That clearly indicates that there is no need, perhaps, or a necessary step that an immediate escalation or a response is required. So what I really feel is that the war cabinet, as you mentioned, met the three, including the defense minister, might have discussed various options. But as you rightly pointed out, Joe Biden had a 25 minutes conversation with Prime Minister Netanyahu, which changed the dynamics of Israel's response. That clearly indicates that US is not going to back them. And as of now, because there was no significant damage, Biden has told Netanyahu that he should see this as a win and not as a loss in response to Iran's attack. So we will see the escalation of the proxy war that has continued from the northern and the southern border of Israel. But I don't see a situation where an immediate attack obviously cannot be ruled out. It might happen, but there's no need, strategically speaking, for Israel to react at this stage, but to remain on high alert. Not just Israel in itself, US is monitoring the situation very closely, as is the entire world, because any misstep could lead to not a world war, but escalation of the conflict beyond these few countries.
Right, absolutely, escalation of the conflict. And that's the reason, Abhijit, that possibly the first time that the United States has been directly involved in the defense of Israel, where interceptors positioned on Israeli soil and US destroyers ringing in the Mediterranean Sea and in the Red Sea, defending Israel, so to speak. So enormous interest in the United States right now to prevent Israel from retaliating. You think there will be a retaliation, as you said, at some point of a very massive scale, as the Israeli former defense minister was promising?
This isn't the first time, Sandeep. If you remember in 1991, or 1990, I think, Saddam Hussein fired lots of Scud missiles at Israel. And in those days, air-to-air interception of ballistic missiles wasn't available, but you did have ground-based Patriots that were shipped. and America was doing time-sensitive interception of any launches, Scud launches it saw in Iraq that were launching those things. So
Right.
this would be the second time.
Right.
But this is also, in many ways, not the first time a diplomatic compound has been attacked either. Remember the Iranian, the IRGC bombed the Jewish Cultural Center, which
In
was
South America.
technically Israeli diplomatic property in
Yes.
Buenos Aires.
Yes.
And in fact, the former ambassador to India, Danny Carmon, his wife died in that bombing.
Right.
So what happens out there is the real American concern is that it isn't to do really with as much of a time-bound escalation as
Right.
it is with Iran taking a direct Israeli attack as justification for going nuclear. So,
Right.
Israel, if it does go in for a strike, will have to calibrate it very, very carefully,
Right.
because there's nothing to prevent Iran then from saying, look, they attacked certain things and nobody came to our assistance, and we're going to go nuclear. Because they
Right.
already have nuclear weapons, you haven't controlled it, therefore
Yes.
we're going to do it.
Right.
We don't know what the trigger for Iran going nuclear is going to be. I
Right.
think that is the primary concern of Biden, number one.
Yes.
Number two concern of Biden is we should remember that a large part of his political constituency is the sort of woke jihadist nexus that exists. We've
Right.
already seen several videos of Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar, who are essentially Muslim Brotherhood funded in that sense by Cair and things like that, the Center for American Islamic Relations,
Right.
and so on and so forth. There are lots of domestic politics playing out here in America as
Right.
well.
Right.
Is there a fear of escalation? Well, how many rounds like this can Iran realistically afford is the question. Because when you go into a situation, you have to count the enemy's ability
Yes.
to go on using these rounds and the willingness to just sit back and take it as opposed to going for active defense, like I said.
Right. Right.
I don't think Israel is going to just take it lying down. They might postpone the attack, but
Yes.
it will be whatever the retaliation for this will be. It will be extraordinarily severe,
Right.
and because sorry if you just give me 30 seconds more.
Yes.
In India, we look in India, America, all of this because our notions of deterrence
Right.
come from American strategic bombing pioneered by Curtis LeMay in World War II.
Yes.
And it is that notion was applied to nuclear weapons, and it only counts about nuclear deterrence as such.
Right. Right.
The Israeli version of deterrence is very much like French dissuasion in that sense. It applies at a conventional level, and they will be looking for a sort of conventional deterrent against Iran, which according to them, they know something will come. But
Yes.
the point of deterrence there is to increase the time gap between repeat rounds of hostilities.
Right, absolutely. Very important point there. And Lev, this issue of the nuclear elephant that's there in the room, that Israel being a nuclear weapon state and Iran being a threshold nuclear weapon state, you think that another round of conflict or this present round of conflict could actually propel Iran to acquiring that nuclear bomb as they've been threatening to do for several years now?
I think there is no doubt that once you lose a battle, you learn from the battle more than if you win the battle.
Right.
And at least as the military aspect is concerned, I think Iran has failed. And I think that even the domestic audience that Iran is catering to, they all know that they failed. So if the motivation to have nuclear missiles is larger now than it was 1 week ago, of course, I don't think there is a question about this. And I think there is another point, because I think among the many misconceptions that we have about West Asia is that, let's say, the anti-Israeli choke polemics of Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and other countries, it is the true policy of those countries. And now we saw that the pro-American, moderate Sunni countries, they protected Israel.
Right.
So we could see their true policy, not their polemic, but their true policy. And also Iran sees it.
Right.
So I think also Iran understands to what extent it is alone against Israel. It has some proxies, but it has no friends around it.
Iran is alone and it's no friends. I'm afraid we're totally out of time. Thank you very much, Lev Aran. A very important point again that you mentioned, the fact that Iran must have struck at Israel, but it's alone. It's the lone wolf if you can call it that, because the entire Arab world has come on the side of Israel and, of course, the United States. But thank you very much for joining us this evening. Abhijit Iyer Mitra, Lev Aran, my colleague Aditya Raj Kaul.
Streaming on News9 Plus. News is now content. Subscribe and get free vouchers.